Go! Go!
It's 2021 and I can confirm, still not afraid of no ghosts. Ghostbusters Afterlife brings the fandom fighting back to the big screen with a direct sequel to the original pair of 80s classics. Jason Reitman takes over for his dad as co-writer and director, but there's a new generation running around with the proton packs on screen as well. We'll break down what ghosts got busted and why the future of paranormal investigations and eliminations may have a surprising new leader. But first, even if you're not afraid of no ghosts, you may still be afraid of spoilers, and friend, I get it. So here's your heads up. We are about to spoil the ectoplasm right out of this movie, so if you haven't seen it yet, as a duly designated representative of IGN, I suggest that you return forthwith to the nearest convenient parallel dimension.
Will this be the moment of her death? Nobody knows.
Now that we're past the spoiler warning, here come the spores, molds, and fungus. And by that, I mean Easter eggs. This movie is a containment grid-busting collection of references and homages to the original two films, but let's talk about the ending before we get to the Twinkie.
What about the Twinkie?
Coming into Afterlife, we knew we'd be getting a story about the next generation of Ghostbusters, that Carrie Coon's Callie would be moving her kids out to Somerville, Oklahoma, into her estranged father's dusty old mystery farm, and that those kids, Phoebe and Trevor, would find adventure there. Adventure and ghost traps. It's a Ghostbusters film after all. But the film actually opens with a sequence of that estranged father, no less than the brains behind the Ghostbusters, Egon Spengler himself, on the run. Later we'll find out that the locals thought he was insane and only knew him as Dirt Farmer, but for now he's trying to trap a very scary, very invisible specter. When that trap fails, the invisible ghost turns into some cool practical dry ice effects and Egon gets zooled. So for the rest of the film, Egon is the ghost guiding his granddaughter so she can succeed where he did not. He helps out with everything from playing chess, to repairing a proton pack, to showing Callie that he didn't forget about her when he took off to this farm in the middle of nowhere through the time-honored tradition of the "I didn't forget about you and this isn't creepy, it's sweet" photo collage. He even helps Trevor get the Ecto-1 going, which leads to the kids tearing through Main Street to trap Muncher. And just because they cause some light to severe property damage, they, in the grand tradition of Ghostbusters, get thrown in the slammer. But when the local sheriff literally asks her, "Who you gonna call?" she dials up the red phone.
We're ready to believe you.
Raise a cult.
I'm calling about what happened in New York.
Now, I don't want to recap the whole movie, but good news, if you really want to know what happens, it's basically the same thing as the original, and we'll talk more about that in our Easter eggs section, but the kids discover a temple designed by certified genius or authentic wacko Ivo Shandor, intending to bring the bubbly god Gozer here to Earth. The kids also realize Egon's sole focus for all these years was keeping Flat Top at bay, and that his farm was designed as a giant ghost trap that could handle all of the psychic energy that Gozer brings with her. Or him, or it.
Whatever it wants to be.
But anyway, this trap still doesn't work for the fledgling Ghostbusters during their showdown with the Goes, and at the end, just when it looks like the Goes has the upper hand, the cavalry shows up. After talking to Phoebe from prison, Ray Stantz gathered up his old comrades in particle accelerators and arrives just in the nick of time with Dr. Pete Venkman and Winston Zeddemore, who incidentally became a super wealthy financier since we last saw him in 1989's Ghostbusters 2. Sure, why not? But when they're no match for Gozer either, and Phoebe tries to take her on solo again, her grandfather completes the set and shows up to help. Now, even if you find it shocking to see actors that we've lost digitally recreated on screen, Grand Moff Tarkin, it's not shocking that this formidable team of new and old Ghostbusters find a way to stop Gozer and trap them, paving a way for not only the future of Ghostbusting, but both a mid- and post-credit scene.
It has a gunner seat?
When the dirt farm settles down and everybody gets to say their goodbyes to Egon, we linger for a moment on Winston with the Ecto-1. He promises to get her back home and take care of her in that loving way that car guys always whisper to their rides. When we get to the post-credit scene, we find Janine Melnitz reminiscing about a moment with Egon from 1984, a deleted scene about her Lucky World's Fair coin. She meets with Winston, who reveals that since he became a billionaire, I guess, he never gave up on the idea that he was a Ghostbuster. He'd been paying bills for both Ray and his bookshop and Egon at the farm, and also kept up with the old fire station, which, contrary to what Ray says earlier, has not become a Starbucks. In fact, we also see Winston opening up the old HQ and letting the battered Ecto-1 drive back into its home. So could Winston, now super rich because he had both the tools and the talent,
We have the tools, we have the talent,
be bankrolling the next generation of Ghostbusters? The post-credit scene continues to show the original containment unit downstairs flashing red, which seems to indicate some bad news still lurking within, as well as a possible sequel, which is good news for us. If Winston is bringing the Ghostbusters back, you have to believe that the Spenglers will be part of that. Phoebe clearly found herself finishing her grandfather's life work, Trevor seems down for whatever, and Callie, I'm sure, would love to get back to the city. But would Ray come back into the fold? Or Venkman? We saw him and Dana Barrett in a mid-credit scene that was frankly adorable, where he was hooked up to the ESP shock experiment box he used to scam his students with back in the day. So, the tools and the talent are once again lined up in Manhattan, where the franchise may once again be running some red lights. Like we said up front, Ghostbusters Afterlife is a non-stop, open 24 hours, all-you-can-eat buffet of spooks, specters, and ghosts, so here they come, rapid fire, and based on our producer's notes that he was scribbling in the dark during the screening, possibly in chronological order. The original piano-tickling Elmer Bernstein score shows up immediately, like as the first production logo fades up, and it just never goes away. Sometimes it's the same piece of music from the original, and sometimes it's tweaked a little bit, but it is front and center, and it's glorious. When Egon gets zooled, I'm making that a verb by the way, he's sitting in a cozy armchair when the spectral version of the terror dog sneaks up behind him. It's staged the same way as Zool's attack on Dana Barrett, with the arms ripping out of the chair and real scary growling. When we first meet Callie, Phoebe, and Trevor in the apartment they're about to get kicked out of, Phoebe is working on an electrical outlet and wearing a headlamp that shines directly into her mom's eyes when she turns to talk to her, exactly the way Egon did to Venkman when they first met Dana Barrett in the original. When the family gets to the dirt farm, we see some classic symmetrical book stacking in Egon's living room. Now it's hard to tell who did that book stacking because it didn't seem like Zool paused to stack those books on his way out of the cold open. Maybe it just reminded Egon of his carefree days of that very first Ghostbusting gig? At one point, Ghost Egon guides Phoebe down into the secret workshop, at the bottom of a fire pole, obviously, because that's the only way to get into a proper Ghostbusting headspace.
You gotta try this pole!
But in this room, we see on screen, for the first time, Egon's collection of spores, mold, and fungus. She continues poking around to find all the old uniforms, and in the breast pocket of Egon's coveralls, she finds a Crunch Bar wrapper, which is a reference to that very same Crunch Bar that Venkman gave to Egon after their first encounter with the library ghost in 1984.
You've earned it.
That's not the only treat the kids find, though. In the glove box of the Ecto-1, they find the only sensible way to describe the size and scale of anything metaphysical. You're goddamn right there's a Twinkie.
That's a big Twinkie.
All the old favorite toys and gear and PKE meters show up as well, including the goggles that Ray wears to their first job at the Sedgwick Hotel, and the headgear used to examine Louis Tully. There's also a scene where the Ghostbuster team is around a table looking at a map and talking about Ivo Shandor. The people behind Phoebe even start to hover a little closer to her as she gets into the good stuff, and the whole energy of the scene plays the same way as the scene from the original that we've been showing you while I've been explaining this. Now, as everyone knows, Gozer can't just show up on her own. The Sumerian demigod needs a keymaster and a gatekeeper. In 1984, that was Dana Barrett and Louis Tully. In Afterlife, it's Paul Rudd's seismologist and would-be stepdad, Gary Gruberson, and Callie. Callie even gets to growl, "There is no mom, only Zool," in a callback to Zoolie's favorite refrain from the original.
There is no Dana, only Zool.
But, just like in 1984, they have to, you know, get together.
I think that would be extraordinarily dangerous.
Yeah. Gary and Callie hooking up while possessed feels almost as weird as it did when Louis and Dana did it. They'd already been on a pretty good first date, and after the dust settles, they have an awkward little, "we were probably going to cross the streams at some point anyway," and that takes some of the weirdness off, but apparently Zool has a very specific style. Not really a consensual one at that. Callie shows up in a sparkly dress, much like the one that Dana Barrett wore at the end of the original. Now, I bought that Dana had that dress in her closet back in 1984 because sparkles were still very in, but I have no idea where Zool got this dress from. The end of Afterlife finds Podcast having to battle and slay a bunch of those adorably chaotic mini-puffed marshmallow boys that were mostly there for marketing purposes, and by the time he's finished, he's covered head to toe in schmello, just like our boys were at the end of the 84 film. The rest of the mini-puffs get wiped out when the giant trap is thrown at the very end, and we see them get blown away in the same, albeit miniature fashion as their big brother. The Bible verse Revelation 6:12 is featured heavily in the film, both spray-painted on Egon's dirt farm and tattooed on Ray's forearm. That's the Bible verse that Ray quotes to Winston in the original when they're talking about how they might be experiencing Judgment Day. Weirdly enough, Ray says, "I remember Revelation 7:12 in the original movie, so maybe the tattoo is a way to not make mistakes like that anymore." Although the film also references the Tunguska blast of 1908, a real-life explosion in a remote part of Russia that has only ever been kind of explained. In Afterlife, the year 1908 is carved into the stone around Gozer's temple as a kind of countdown to Gozer's return. In the original film, though, Ray mentions to Louis in the closing moments that he's been a witness to the biggest interdimensional cross-rip since the Tunguska blast of 1909, which makes Ray just as wrong as he was about Revelation 7:12. So maybe Ray's just really bad with numbers at this point. At least Afterlife got a chance to correct him almost 40 years later.
you have been a participant in the biggest interdimensional cross-rip since the Tunguska Blast of 1909.
Anyway, those are just a few of the references to the originals that we spotted, and we didn't even try to tackle all the little aesthetic nods that Jason Reitman makes with camera angles and production design where the slime drips in the same way, or a garage door reveals the Ecto-1's license plate. But again, if you think of the normal amount of Easter eggs the movie has as a Twinkie, how big would that make Afterlife's Twinkie?
35 feet long, weighing approximately 600 pounds.
But what did you make of Ghostbusters Afterlife? Did it live up to your expectations as the first proper Ghostbusters movie in over 3 decades, and was it worth the wait since, like, a year and a half ago when it was originally supposed to come out before getting delayed like 4 times? More importantly, if there is a sequel, where should it go next? Let us know in the comments, and for a more careful analysis of a long-awaited sequel that was even longer awaited after getting delayed to hell, check out our breakdown of No Time to Die, and for everything on the latest sequels to all your favorite movies that came out when you were 9, make sure you're following IGN wherever you like to watch.